Hello and welcome to a brand new and extremely special episode of Solving for X. I am Aaliya.
And I'm Vaishnavi. Today's episode is extremely special. Today, we have with us an incredible guest, Arya Nair, a psychology and sociology expert. Hi, Arya.
Hello.
So, Arya, please tell us and our audience something about yourself. What do you do? Where are you from?
Sure. So my name is Arya. I recently graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Psychology and my Bachelor's of Science in Sociology. I live in Virginia in the United States, and I have a massive love for psychology and mental health.
Oh my god, that is so amazing. For how long have you had an interest in psychology?
I've always been interested in some of the concepts related to psychology, but we don't really think about them as psychology. So, for one example, like personality tests, like Hogwarts houses or MBTI, things like that. I used to be interested in those when I was a kid, and turns out that is a form of psychology called personality psychology. So, from there, I got interested in psychology and I applied to college with that as my degree. And then I started taking courses about various factors in psychology, such as mental health, well being, maybe disorders and diseases, and then even like addiction and various different things. And it's been really cool to learn about.
Could you tell us a bit about your journey into the fields of psychology? And I've also heard that you are majoring in sociology as well. So, what sparked your interest in these areas? I mean, you told us about psychology. What about sociology?
Sure. So, psychology and sociology are very closely related fields. One looks at the mind and the person, and the other looks at the society around them and how people interact with each other. So, they go very much hand in hand. They're very related topics. That's why I chose to study both, so that I could get both a personal viewpoint and then also a societal viewpoint. And I started my journey with this. Obviously, I started studying it in college, but there's this organization called Crisis Text Line, which is basically like a crisis hotline that instead of calling, you text into it. And there are volunteers that can help you with any crisis you're going through, if you need support, if you need mental health resources, and they can help you with that. So I first started out my interest in clinical psychology through volunteering for this program, which taught me a lot about how to use active listening and use empathy, and also kind of the scientific background to a lot of these problem solving techniques and safety planning and things like that. And then from there, obviously, with my classes and learning about it in school, I started doing research for a social psychology and neuroscience research lab where we basically create our own original studies related about human aggressive behavior and emotion. So my specific study interest was relationships between people and partner violence, specifically among the emerging adult population, which is ages 18 to 25. And that population has been the population that I've focused all of my research and internships on in the past 4 years.
So, you started your journey in college. Did you do anything before that, like in high school?
Yeah, absolutely. So in high school, I took a psychology course in my high school, which definitely opened up my interests. I also actually participated in a podcast like this when I was in high school, where I helped interview psychologists and psychiatrists. And we made a podcast for our school's Women in STEM chapter. So it's funny how things come back around, right?
Oh my god, that is so amazing. I mean, like,
I
it seems
know.
like we're on the right track.
Exactly.
That is so cool. So, I actually didn't know that. Okay, so as
Yeah.
As a WiSTEM alumna, well, did you have any particular experiences or mentors that significantly shaped your path in STEM and, subsequently into studying the human mind and society?
Yeah, absolutely. So two things. One, I participated in the research project that Woman in STEM has. I think it's called Athena, and that research program was really useful. So I was paired with a mentor who had research in neuroscience, and I got exposure to learning how to write a research paper and learning how to do a literature review, read all these articles and understand what they mean, and then make my own project out of that. So I wrote a paper with this mentor through the Athena program with WiSTEM, and that was really exciting. Definitely introduced me to the world of research and expanded my interest into the neuroscience space. Even though that isn't something that I completely pursue, it's definitely relevant in psychology. So that was one thing that WiSTEM helped me with. The other thing is contacts and just the community of WeSTEM. I met a lot of other students through WeSTEM, both internationally and within my own school, that were interested in the same things that I was. So it was really easy to spark discussions and learn more about topics by just talking to each other. Psychology is such a mainstream and day to day field that we can learn about and implement into our own lives. So it was really good to have a community to talk about it with.
Yeah, I agree. Community is very important.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've also learned that you've been studying addiction and addiction recovery.
Yeah, so I never knew that that would be an interest of mine. And to this day, I'm still not 100% sure if I'm going to pursue that as my career, but I had a very impactful experience last summer where so I had taken a few courses about addiction in university, and you also learn about it a lot by simply observing and and seeing how people in your community are affected by addiction. And so in the US, I was aware of the methods for rehabilitation here, and a large um, factor of people not seeking recovery from addiction is the legal side that they might face, which is where my sociology degree comes in, because you can think about how society kind of forces people to stay addicted because if they want help, they have to maybe go to jail or go through the legal process, which can be very hard. So I applied for a program where I got to study abroad in Ireland. So I lived in Ireland for 3 months and I worked with people in recovery from addiction from various different substances. And these were actually people who had come out of the prison system into a residential recovery program. So with them, I got to work on various behavior interventions to help them prevent relapsing. And then my favorite part was working on mindfulness and self care, which a lot of people take for granted, but it's very scientifically backed. And to be able to implement mindfulness into their recovery progress really helped them. So that was an amazing experience, and it's something I'm looking forward to exploring more.
Uh, that's interesting. So, what's a key factor in understanding addiction in from a psychological view?
I think, ooh, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of different dynamics of addiction. The main one that always comes to my mind from this experience that I had, there's obviously a neurobiological component. So, genetically, if your ancestors, if your family is predispositioned to addiction, that should be something that you are on the lookout for ahead of time and working to combat preventative treatment so that you don't actually end up falling into addiction. That's one. And then the other thing I would say that is really important is to think about like I said, that sociology degree helped me think about the wider perspective. And with addiction, it's not just one person decides one day to go try and use a recreational drug and then gets in trouble, right? It's a little bit broader than that. There's various different legal systems that play in, political systems, socioeconomic status plays a part. And then, of course, trauma. And trauma is such a fascinating topic. The trauma that some of these people who fall into addiction have gone through in their childhood and in their life, 100% is what affects their actual addiction and how they receive treatment, how they are able to recover. So these are some really important things to keep in mind with addiction, especially if you're interested in working in the addiction field. You want to make sure that you are looking at these as people and not as addicts. That's a main, very clear distinction that needs to be made.
Yeah, that really humanizes these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to recognize. I get it. So, can you share a promising approach in addiction recovery in all your years of studying? What have you learned?
Interesting. Let's see. So when I was in Ireland, they used a really interesting therapeutic model called community reinforcement approach family therapy. So we have family therapy in the US, but I had not heard of this specific treatment used for addiction before. The way that it works is these people who are coming out of the prison system and going into this recovery program live with each other. So it's a residential program. They live together in the same house for, I think it's 6 months or something like that. And they actually act like a family. They call each other brother and sister, and which I thought was very funny because I'm an only child, so it was very funny being referred to as sister, right? And they carry out these chores and daily tasks. They speak to each other with respect and they learn to treat each other as family. This really makes an impact because a lot of people who have gone through addiction lose their ability to trust people and also have a lot of trauma related to their family. So those two aspects can really be solved using this community reinforcement family therapy approach. I would say that is extremely promising in my opinion. And then I would also say looking at boosting motivation and promoting behavior change through well being and mindfulness techniques, because that is my absolute niche. And I think those techniques often go underappreciated in the field of psychology because it seems pretty simple, like, oh, yeah, you just have to do some mindfulness techniques or some self care techniques. But genuinely, especially I would say looking at the gender difference in the way that people respond to rehabilitation. Men specifically are often deprived of a lot of those methods, a lot of those mindfulness methods, a lot of those self-care and well-being methods. So those, I think, have a lot of promising growth in the future.
So, what is one common myth about addiction that you would like to debunk?
Ooh, common myth about addiction. Interesting. Let me think. I feel like there are definitely a lot. Um, let's see. I think a lot of the understanding about addiction, like I said earlier, is that it's a choice. So people are getting up one day and deciding that they want to go use a drug or use a substance. Whether or not that initial use was voluntary, it is literally a brain disease. It's not someone's choice. And just to tell someone, oh, like you should quit, won't work. They actually have to go through treatment and they have to go through various different medications or just different stages of addiction to be able to recover from that. It's not a matter of willpower, is what I would say. I think that's a really common misunderstanding, is that people who are suffering from addiction failed in their morality, or they have some character flaw, they lack willpower, but it's simply a health issue, just like any other disease is seen as a health issue in the medical field. This too should be seen as a medical issue because the addiction actually changes the brain structure and the brain's functions. So that reward and motivation that they get from using a substance is completely different than it would be for someone without addiction. So I think that that's definitely one big myth I would love to debunk. But I think it's a pretty common understanding amongst most medical professionals, but maybe not amongst general public.
So, what do you consider a big challenge in psychological research?
Mm. I was going to say, if you're going to ask about a big challenge in psychology generally, I would say that right now there's an issue in the research field with getting the same outcomes with research. So, um, oh gosh, what is it called? There's a name for it. Um, Let me think. Hold on. It's um, the re something. What is it called? Okay, I'll come back to that. But in terms of psychology and addiction recovery today, hmm, I think ego. I don't know if that's a so-called like scientific answer, but for to reach sobriety, to reach a state of full rehabilitation from addiction, one must be able to put their ego aside, and other people also have to be able to put their ego aside. I think that's a pretty big challenge to face because you've obviously been taught um that you should say like, oh, I, me, and my all of the time, but in terms of addiction and recovering from addiction, it takes a lot of taking responsibility for your actions and your words, but also other people taking responsibility for their actions and their words. So I think that's a big challenge in addiction today specifically. I think maybe back in the day before it might have been easier, but now it's definitely harder. And social media glamorizes addiction so much. So that definitely contributes to people falling into addiction more often or not understanding how prevalent and how dangerous it is. Also, I remembered what I was talking about before, when I was talking about the issues in research in psychology. I was talking about the replication crisis is the name. I forgot what the name was, but it's called replication crisis. And specifically right now, when studies are being retested to see if these really old theories that we've based a lot of our knowledge on is still consistent and true, they're finding that the results are not the same, which means that either there's some sort of error in the previous data or something is happening right now that is causing the research results to be completely different. Something about our society and our brains now, or about the tests that were administered back in the day when they made these studies. That's what I was talking about. I just wanted to add that back in.
Okay, so can you like give an example of these changes that you mentioned that were different in the previous research and today's research?
Yeah, so in terms of testing and retesting, suppose you've outlined all of the research methods in your study, right? So take some really classic older paper, and the way that they have written it, their methods back then are supposed to outline exactly how they conducted the study so that it can be conducted today in this day and age in the same way, but produce the exact same results, even though it's a different group of people in a different time period. So there's this project called the Reproductibility Project, and it replicated, I think I want to say maybe about 100 or so psychology experiments, and they found that more than half of those experiments failed to replicate, meaning that the new studies had completely different results than the old studies, which should not happen because then you can't trust the psychology research that we've been learning as well as we did before, now that we know that it's not replicating the same way. Especially personally, as I'm going into the field of clinical psychology, the cognitive behavioral therapy model has a lot of issues coming up right now with the previous research on it not being supported in current replications. So if you were to even slightly change the conditions of an experiment that happened in the past now, of course it would give you a different result. But if you use the exact same results, it should come out the same. So there are studies that are really popular, such as let's see, there's treatments for prolonged exposure for PTSD, and there's been tons and tons of research on this, tons of papers. But you have to think about when people write new papers, they are basing it off of the previous research when they write it. They're doing their literature review and they are referencing these older papers. So if all these papers are written starting from the same root and we retest that first root and it no longer stands up to the test of science, then that's your issue right there. So that's what I would say is like a good example of the replication crisis right now, which is why it's so important for young people to go into the field of psychology to help promote research in this field, to help promote interventions in this field.
With this, we are at the end of today's episode. Thank you so much, Arya, for sharing your insights. This has been an amazing episode, especially for those who aspire to be psychologists like myself.
Thank you. And I had a great time. I hope this is helpful or, your listeners can enjoy.
Stay tuned for yet another mind bending episode only on Saturdays.